Okay.
All right. Hey guys, welcome. My name is Wiebe. I'll be giving this presentation together with Louis. Our topic is the simulation of burnout process by the means of a multi-order reified temporal causal network model. I'll be starting with a short introduction and I'll explain some things about our model, after which Louis will take over and he will talk about the different scenarios that we have and the results. Next. Yeah. Well, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what is burnout? We know that burnout is a syndrome, and it can occur when a person is exposed to chronic stress and frustration. There are several symptoms for burnout. We will be focusing on 3 in our report. The mental exhaustion, which can be described as everlasting tiredness, which is affecting the person's life. We have the personal accomplishment, which in our case stands for the decrease of one's productivity. And we have the depersonalization, which is the detachment of one's work and ambition. We know that the burnout can lead to psychological trauma, which in return can complicate the return back into society, which is why we thought it was a nice topic to model and to learn more about. We wanted to start with a literature review to know everything what there was to know and to make sure that we were on the right track. And pretty soon we found the Maslach burnout inventory, also called as the MBI, and it turned out that this was the base for many other research that built upon this. For example, the Golombiewski model. The Golombiewski model argued that the depersonalization would affect the personal accomplishment, which would in turn affect the emotional exhaustion. And they saw the depersonalization process as a defense mechanism. Another model that is built on the MBI is the Leader-Maslach model. That is the model that we see here. Can you see my cursor as well? Or should I do this? Yeah. This can be seen here. We see that it starts with emotional exhaustion, which goes to depersonalization. Note, however, that there's no node between depersonalization and the personal accomplishment itself. And around it, you have the 6 initial nodes that all influence one or multiple symptoms. What we noticed was that none of these models applied any adaptive behavior, even though we saw in research that it could be greatly beneficial for your model to do so. This led to our model. We decided to take the Leader-Maslach model as a base and to change a couple of things. For example, we added a connection between the depersonalization and the personal non-achievement. The personal non-achievement is the personal accomplishment, but we changed the name because we thought that the name was a bit misleading. We added a node between the personal non-achievement and the workload. And then we decided to add an emotional regulation component to the emotional exhaustion. Then we decided to add therapy to the network because we wanted to see how this would influence the burnout itself. And then we made the workload, depersonalization, and the emotional regulation, we made it adaptive. In order to numerically represent our model, a multi-order reified temporal causal network was introduced. There were 4 main characteristics: the state value for every node at each time step, the connectivity between the node X and Y described by the weight, the aggregation function, which defines how multiple incoming connections impact one node, and we have the timing, which defines the speed with which the state of the node changes based on the impact of the incoming connections. Now, what are the functions that we used? We used the identity function, of course, which is used when there was only one connection. We used the advanced logistic sum combination function when there would be multiple connections in a node. We have the formula here. And here we see that sigma is the steepness and tau is the threshold. Another function we used was the Hebbian learning, which can be found here, as you can see, which is used for the learning components. And here mu is the persistence factor, which corresponds to the learning ability. If mu would be 1, it means that you would remember everything that you would learn, which would be a dream for many person, but often not really applicable. And the last one we used was the step mod function, which we used for the therapy. Here 0 means no therapy, 1 means therapy, where f equals the time duration and the delta corresponds to the resting time. This led to this model. This is our model. We have the emotional exhaustion, which leads to depersonalization, which leads to personal non-achievement, which flows back to emotional exhaustion as well. And we have the other nodes around it, which all influence multiple or one symptom. And the red arrows here, they correspond to the adaptive connection itself. Now, all research need to have an hypothesis as well. So we came up with the adaptive attributes have a non-negligible impact on the simulation. And the further we went into the research, we wanted to add more about the therapy because it was pretty interesting. So we decided to add that it was expected that the adaptive components play a crucial role for an efficient therapy against burnout. Now I'll give the floor to Louis, who is going to tell you more about the simulation and the results. Do you want me to stop sharing, or do you want me to click further?
Yes, please, so that I can take over. All right. Yeah. Okay. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Can you hear me as well?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, once we created the model, we decided to test or like model 3 scenarios. So first one is to model and trigger a burnout. The second one was to take these parameters that triggered the burnout and apply a therapy session. So we had, like, in this case, we applied a few short ones or multiple short ones or a few longer ones and see the differences in these therapy sessions. And the third scenario was to apply, or like actually to take away the ability to learn and to see which impact it has with the therapy. So let me first show you scenario 1. Yes. So here, as you can see, we tried to trigger a burnout by giving initial values and like different parameter values, so that we at the end the model converges to an high intensity for like the 3 Maslow subscales, such as depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, and personal non-achievement, which is here it's a mistake. It should be characterized as personal non-achievement, but it's like called personal accomplishment. Then here we have the emotional exhaustion and depersonalization. So we can see that in the end, these values convert to a really high level, and we can, with fairly approximation, assume that we reach the burnout state here. What you also can see is, for example, that in this case, the emotion regulation didn't have any influence, which means that this fictive person we tried to model was not able to cope with the situation at all and fell into this depressive state. If we take these initial values and then we apply, so we took these initial values and we applied therapies. So here on the left, you see where we applied shorter but multiple therapy sessions, which are shown by the rainbow colored graph here. So they have like discrete functions where they instantly apply therapy or instantly get away. And then on the right, we have the one with longer therapy sessions. So what we can see first describe the left graph. So yeah, we can see an initial progress or evolution of the model that is similar to the one before, since it's the same, we use the same initial parameters and so on. But what is interesting to see is once the therapy session starts, we can really see a second order, an increase in second order emotion regulation, which is here the dashed line. that rapidly increase and which represents the learning rate. So there's like a rapid increase in the learning rate, which consequently influences the first order emotional regulation, which shoots up here. The end effect is increase in emotional regulation here. And as we can see with the first therapy session, the three Maslow subscales, emotional regulation, depersonalization, and emotional personal non-achievement, sorry, they start to decrease. And we see overall a pattern of decreasing, like overall decreasing. But what we also see is that in between the therapy session, there's a slight increase of these three scales, which is actually normal because, as Wiebe said before, you have these therapy sessions where you learn from it, and once they stop, you also lose a bit what you learned, which is a normal process of learning, and those you have the tendency to get back to a higher state, which could be like go back to maybe like a burnout stage. But if you apply like the short therapy session overall, we see like a decline in these three symptoms. And if you compare it to the graph on the right, we see that the longer therapy session actually invoked the same pattern where we have a decrease in these three subscales. But the difference is that with the same time points, we reach a way lower level of these three subscales than we have here on the left, as you can see. And what we also have is with the longer therapy session is the emotional regulation kicks in and goes almost up to maximum value. So it's like way more efficient than shorter ones. And the third scenario is where we apply the same, again, like a therapy session, like few short therapy sessions, but we have a learning rate that's really not present here. So basically, the fictive person is not able to work to learn a lot from these therapy sessions, and that's what we see as well here. So the second order emotional regulation goes quickly to 0. So the learning rate is non-existent, and this we can also see at some point here when the first order emotional regulation shoots up and then stays the same and doesn't change. And the consequences of this is that the emotional regulation shoots up after the first therapy session, but in between loses a lot and almost get back to the initial state. So what we have here is we rapidly find ourselves in like a fluctuating states where the therapy sessions don't, after the first therapy session, they don't bring any improvement. So it's like for long-term effects or long run, it's inefficient because we always find ourselves in this fluctuating states going back and forth between two different equilibriums or like states. So yeah, once we run this our model, we want to verify it as well. So to verify it, we compared the numerical values with the theoretical values. So what we did is we took the time points of 3 different nodes. So from the base level, we took the personal non-achievement. From the first level, we took the first order workload. And from the second level, we took the second order emotional regulation. And at time point 20,000, we compared the numerical values with the theoretical values using the different functions we have here, as we stated before. So for the personal non-achievement and the second order emotional regulation, we used the allogistic function, whereas for the first order workload, we used the Hebbian function. And as you can see here, the difference between the theoretical value and the computed value is fairly low deviation. So what we also did is we validated the model. So how did we validate it to empirical data? So what we did is we found in this paper from Leiter and Maslach, we found that they tried to determine the different stages using a rating scale from 0 to 5. So for example, here on the left, this is a graph taken from the paper. So if you have like a 5 out of 5 for exhaustion, a 4 out of 5 for cynicism, and like 2.8 out of 5 for personal non-accomplishment, then you would be diagnosed with burnout. And the same counts for the different stages. Yes. So what we did is we tried to normalize this scale, and we were trying to fine-tune the model to the burnout and to the ineffective. So to the process of fine-tuning, we used the MATLAB optimization tool, but it was quite intensive. So one fine-tuning process took almost 6-7 hours. So we were limited to fine-tune only 3 variables, which were the initial value for the emotional exhaustion, the speed factor for the depersonalization, and the personal achievement. So these were the 3 variables that were fine-tuned. And here are the results we get with an RMSE of 0.17 or 0.35 for different stages, which is a fairly good approximation. And here, for example, is a graph that shows the results of the fine-tuning, where we try to fine-tune the blue line to the blue dots, the green line to the green dots, and the yellow line to the yellow dots. And yeah, as we can see, it's a fairly vague approximation. Which brings us to the conclusion that we were able to demonstrate that it is important to have like a first and second order level, which basically showed the importance of neuroplasticity, and that it is actually present in these cases, that the person, we can assume that it is present because we know that therapy sessions normally are effective, and to be effective, the person has to learn from it, and there has to be neuroplasticity. So what we would recommend is to include this in further research, to include an adaptive model in order to have like a better approximation and a more realistic model. And for future research, we also could suggest to make the environmental nodes adaptive. So for example, as we have shown here, these nodes, for example, interpersonal conflict, supervisor and co-worker support, client cooperation, in this model, they were all constant, but I think it would be more realistic to make them as well adaptive, because over the time, they also change, because for example, the co-worker support changes over the time. If you are in a burnout stage, then I could definitely imagine that the support is different. So that's something that can be improved, and yeah. Are there any questions?